Hi, everybody. Welcome. Sorry for the couple minutes, just getting things organized, but I'm going to be moderating today. My name is Kate Goodrich. I'm a biology professor at Widener. And quick overview, I'm going to introduce the event. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. Then as we get into the actual panel, we're going to have some specific direct questions that I have right here for the panelists, and then that won't take the whole time. We're going to try to be mindful of time and open it up so that you all can ask questions of the panelists, if that sounds good. All right. So just broadly introducing this event, it's been sort of envisioned as a teach-in, and I don't know if you guys know what that is, but where it's an informal learning opportunity. The panelists are experts in the field, and we want to create a nice, safe, comfortable environment for anybody here in the audience to ask questions that you want to know about. So to that end, we're not going to be recording the audience. The event is being recorded by a couple of cameras there, but they're aimed at us and we're mic'd. So when you ask a question, we're going to repeat the question back just so the mics can pick it up and the recording can pick it up, and then we'll talk through it. Sound good? Okay. So I'm also going to give you a little bit of background for this event. We thought of it in part for Women's History Month. So this is one of the Women's History Month events here. But we're doing it for that reason, to look at the gender identity and sex, how that impacts our daily lives, and also historically how it's impacted and shaped our culture and our political landscape here in the United States. We're also doing it because of current legislation and executive orders that have gone out, and a lot of those don't align with what biological sex is currently understood as, nor do they align with the understanding of psychology and social dynamics of gender identity. So we thought it would be a good chance to talk to the campus broadly as an audience about what the biological understanding is of sex determination and also gender identity, especially the social and psychological aspects of that. And we also just are happy to answer questions and to talk about things. All right, so with that, I'm going to stop talking. I will step aside and let the panelists introduce themselves.
So hi, I'm Professor Mariah Schug, and I'm faculty in psychology. I'm also chair of the Gender, Women's, and Sexuality Studies Department. My research area is cross-cultural psychology, so I'm bringing that perspective to our conversation today.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Fran Weaver. I am a professor in the biology department, and I teach a lot of different things, including developmental biology, which is where today's information, my part of this presentation, will come from. And my research area right at the moment has been sex determination in a non-human species, which are horseshoe crabs. We don't know a lot about them.
I'm Dr. Jen Pollitt. I'm at Temple University. My students know me as Dr. J. I am the assistant director and an assistant professor in gender, sexuality, and women's studies. I got my PhD right here at Widener in human sexuality, so it's exciting to be back. That being said, I'm a sexuality educator through and through, and so what I'm going to bring into our conversation are the way that gendered and sexual scripts, the things that we learn about gender, really impact all the decisions that we make, some that we'll probably be really familiar with and others that might surprise us. So I teach courses like sex education, sexuality and disability, social perspectives on digital pornography, the other sex ed. So what does porn teach us? And so anything you want to know about sex, I'm the person to talk to about it. But today I'm hopefully going to be able to answer all your questions about gender and how all these things come together.
Cool. All right. I'm going to put up some slides here because the first question will go to Fran, Dr.
Okay.
Weaver. Do you want to run these?
I can run them, yeah,
okay.
that's fine.
All right,
Okay, just
let's get that up and then I'll pop over. It's all yours.
Okay. Well, obviously I knew what the first question was before we started, which is what's the biology of what we call the binary, okay? So all of my slides have words on them. I'll just say a few words about them. So we're used to we are taught to think about XX and XY individuals, right? XX being females that usually produce estrogen, and they produce ovaries, and XY being usually males that release testosterone and DHT, which are called androgens. That's not all the chromosomal variations there are. There are many more. So this binary is not really a true binary. Okay? They make germ cells that will eventually give rise to eggs or sperm. And those germ cells migrate to the developing gonads, which would be the future ovary or testes, depending upon ovaries or testes, depending upon which hormones you actually end up making. So that gonad is bipotential, could go either way, could be either, okay? It all depends upon what happens next, okay? And what happens next is here. This has to do with genes. This is a relatively complex figure. It's not necessarily important that you follow the figure, but that you follow what is happening, okay? So here's the gonad or genital ridge, which could eventually be either a testis or an ovary or something in between. If the genes I describe here are operating normally, operating effectively, let's use that word, then if the individual has an SRY gene, which is on the Y chromosome, and also is expressing the SOX9 gene, then eventually you'll end up with testicles, okay? If the individual expresses beta-catenin at high levels, which is the result of the other thing Wnt4, and FOXL2, then you'll end up with an ovary, okay? It is not one suppressing the other. It is not one suppressing something. They suppress one another. So there's a choice. The XX pathway leads to ovaries, but not to testes. The XY pathway leads to testes, but not to ovaries. So it's not like one's damping down another. And it is true, for those of you that are curious about that we do all make both hormones, but at very different levels. Okay. The hormone levels then, as a result of the production of the testis and the ovaries, or the ovaries in development, either are high androgen levels, in which individuals develop their testes, epididymis, seminal vesicle, vas deferens, and prostate gland internally, and the scrotum and penis externally. These individuals develop increased facial hair and enlarged larynx during puberty. Okay? Okay. With high estrogen level, develop a uterus, the cervix, the Skene's glands, which are very interesting glands that provide secretions. They're kind of like the prostate in males, but they provide secretion to the vagina, and vagina internally, the labia and the clitoris externally, and develop breasts and begin menstruation during puberty. Those external structures that I just described, the labia and the clitoris, the penis and the scrotal sac into which the testes descend, are the things that are used for sex assignment at birth, okay? It could happen at birth, could also happen during a sonogram. It's a little harder to get it right with a sonogram, okay? Any ambiguity in these structures may lead to an assignment of intersex. And although there's more to talk about, I will end the slides.
All right, so that, in terms of questions that I sort of wanted to seed this discussion with, the first one was about the biology of sex determination. So we've covered that. I wanted to ask Dr. Schug, but really anybody on the panel, to talk about now a little bit of the psychological and sociological effects that gender may have, and also all three of you perhaps could talk about how the biology of sex might link or not link to gender identity, which I think is an important distinction.
So I'll leave most of the sociological impacts and the biological descriptions to my colleagues here. But as far as social or psychological implications are concerned, I start by looking at this from a developmental perspective, where kids come into the world looking to create categories. There's so much stimulation in the world around them that they have to create categories to be able to process anything. I mean, really, adults do too, but it starts in childhood. And when you look at our society, and this is not true of all societies, when you look at our society, this gender binary is really the first thing we tend to introduce kids to. When the kid is born, what do you want to know? That they're healthy and what sex they've been assigned. And if somebody tries not to tell you that, it is very uncomfortable, because you have this feeling that you can't really know the kid until you know what category we've pushed them into. And this is not true in every culture. We have lots of cultures with 3, 4, 5, even more gender categories. But it's very primary in our culture. And this leads to this strong commitment early in childhood to classifying everything into male or female. And so I would argue that some of the challenges that we see our trans communities facing today are the result of people placing differing expectations on males and females, even though this is an artificial binary. And so we're desperate to know these categories because we feel like they're essential for predicting someone's behavior and deciding how we're supposed to treat them. But of course, none of that is true. You can be biologically and identify as female and yet behave in stereotypically masculine ways. And so these categories are artificial, but they're so ingrained in us that we feel like we don't know how to interact with people without them. And I think that that's why we see a lot of discomfort around transgender identities, is because people, are ultimately feeling insecure. I don't know how I'm supposed to behave with somebody if I can't fit them into this nice, clear category. And so I think that it's helpful to recognize that there are so many more categories out there, that this is not a simple truth, and that instead we can be open to lots of different gender possibilities, lots of different behavioral possibilities, and identify people as who they are as individuals instead of being so committed to these categories.
I think that is a great segue into an experiment that I would love to conduct with all of you, or maybe I'll just conduct it with you three up here. So to really drive home the point of how ingrained these categories are, and again, varying society to society, but here in the US, how ingrained the categories are. So I'm going to ask you both, or everyone here. Let's picture a heterosexual couple, and they're on a date, and they're stereotypically masculine and feminine. And they go to a restaurant, and they are ordering, let's say they're over 21, they're ordering a drink. What kind of cocktail or what kind of drink is the man ordering?
Probably not a cocktail.
So yeah, what do you think he's ordering?
A whiskey.
A whiskey, right? What might she be ordering?
Depends upon the person, but it could be a cocktail, but it could also be beer or whiskey, right?
No, but if we're thinking in just real gender.
Real gendered is the woman orders a fancy pink cocktail.
There you go.
That's
right
it.
now they're like going to eat some food. So what is she ordering?
A salad.
And what is he ordering?
It's a steak.
Right now they go out to their cars. What is he driving?
A truck.
What is she driving?
A little car that's cute.
Right?
A little
like,
cute little car.
listen, y'all, we just gendered lettuce. That is how ingrained, right? The gender binary is here. And, if you want to think that's a hilariously ridiculous example, but I don't know, what does that mean for people's cardiovascular health? Right? If one gender is, supposed to or socialized into eating more vegetables, right? So something as simple or things that you don't necessarily realize, that we gender stuff all of the time. And so the way that we understand gender is socially, culturally, and time-bound. The scripts we have for what it means to be a man or to be a woman now are different than what those scripts were 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 200 years ago, 10,000 years ago, and they're ever changing and evolving. But humans also aren't that great at changing and evolving. And so it can butt up against this tension or this discomfort, I don't know. Can I have sex with you? Do you want to have sex with me? Do I order the steak? Do I order the salad? What happens if I don't follow these gender rules and there's a gender rule violation? The small punishments someone may be cracking a joke or giving you a funny look, or more significant gender rule violations, right, can come with threats to actual emotional safety, physical safety, and beyond. And so when we're looking at these categories or boxes that we are so desperate to push people into, out of like, the evolutionary lizard part of our brain, which was like, if I eat this mushroom, will it kill me? Or if I eat this mushroom, will it nourish me? Right? So making these shortcuts so we can stay alive. But like, hopefully we're not all foraging for mushrooms now, outside of maybe a recreational hobby. And we can take time to think about things more completely and complexly. We have modern medicine and science, right? We know so much more. Babies don't just like happen magically. No, there is reproduction that is involved, sperm and eggs. And there is so much ambiguity, both phenotypically and genotypically, that can represent our internal sense of self and also what our external body looks like. And they don't necessarily always align perfectly because of that ever-changing evolution of how gender emerges through time, through culture, through the way that we're socialized.
That's a great segue for another question. I'm just wondering if you can, any of the panelists, dissect a little bit the difference between biological sex and gender identity, that these two things aren't necessarily or at all married together, right?
Well, that is it, right? Biological sex, or it's chromosomal sex, let's call that, or any other level that I talked about earlier, is not a gender identity. It's just biology. It doesn't tell you who you are. It does not tell you what you should look like. It does not tell you who you love, right? Biology cannot do that.
In addition, I would say we can even take it a step further, right? So we've got our biology, our chromosomes. Then we've got layered on top, like that internal essence or that sense of self. So how those chromosomes and all the physical sensations that they're creating in our bodies help us understand our innermost thoughts and workings. And then we also have gender expression. So how are we choosing to express ourselves? And then how is our culture, how is society interacting with the way that we are expressing ourselves? And then like to take it like even one step further, recognizing that that is like variable and can change throughout the course of our lifetime, from the time we're teeny tiny tots, certainly as we enter reproductive years, middle age, aging. And so we can look a lot different and express our genders a lot differently too. Meanwhile, using the same exact words to identify the gender that we are, even if our expression is different. So there's like a whole bunch of different layers. Chromosomes and biology are just one part of that. But then also how we express ourselves. And then on top of this, all of the gender roles and gender rules that we feel compelled to follow or that we want to break.
Right, which I would like to expand a little bit on the concept of gender expression. You can really get yourself into trouble when you're making assumptions about somebody's identity or somebody's orientation based on their external behavior. Because you can have somebody who identifies as male, identifies as heterosexual, and yet maybe has a voice that we would view as stereotypically feminine. And these are exactly the types of efforts people make to create stereotypes or categories around people that simply don't work.
I would say this is a quick anecdotal story, but I'm really fortunate that my best friend let me be present at the birth of her first child. And so I was able to pull him out. It was a magical experience. I am not a birthing person, so that's as close as I wanted to get. But I will say that at the baby shower, she was pregnant. She did not want to know the sex of the baby. She wanted it to be a surprise and didn't want to already pile on assumptions of the way people would talk to her belly. And so at the baby shower, which I organized, I got a really cute pale pastel orange and mint green little sweater vest, like pants situation. And one of the guests, when she opened it, leaned over and said, "Oh my God, you know the sex of the baby. She must be having a boy," because it was a pantsuit and a sweater vest. And I said, "I honestly have no idea. I just thought this was like really cute." And she was like, "Oh, well, then the baby must be a lesbian." And I was like, whoa. We have so many more developmental stages to go through before we get to identifying this like in utero fetus's sexual orientation, right? And so again, she wasn't saying that. She was saying that like because she was excited and she just wanted to know, but it was because we gender lettuce, right? That's where it comes from. Just already like seeing before this little person has even entered the world, all of the expectations, hopes, and dreams that people who are fortunate to be part of the village raising this child, like, I just want you to be okay, right? I just want you to thrive, and I want this to go well for you. And in a society that is often cruel, right, to folks who don't fit neatly in boxes, like you can see where there is a desperation to make sure that like you can guide a young person into the box that you think works for them, right? Which is like a violation of the real golden rule. Don't treat people, we're often taught like treat people how you would want to be treated, but that doesn't really work. We have to treat people how they want to really be treated. And so something to consider too.
So that's a great segue into my last question. This is going great. And that was from all these perspectives, I think the health and safety and well-being of the individual is clearly important, but can any or all of you speak to sort of the importance to a person's ability to express their gender identity in a way that feels true to them? Also, to that end, I mean, I'm thinking not just in terms of psychological development, but also physical health and all of that, where this might intersect with like doctor's visits, how this might impact you on safety and things like that, allowing a person to actually, fully express their individual gender identity and all the other aspects that come with that.
Who wants to go?
I'm not ready. I'm not ready to answer that question.
I'll go ahead, but I'm going to get very specific actually with an issue that has been sort of covered in current politics, which is the removal of options for a sex that is non-binary on legal documents. So for example, we had until recently an option other than male or female on passports here in the US, and now that option has been removed. And so people who are applying for a passport, people who are renewing their passport, somebody who loses their passport, if they don't identify with the sex that they were identified as at birth, they don't have an option. They have to choose that birth identity, even if it in no way reflects how they feel about themselves or how they are perceived in the world.
Or even their biology.
Yeah, or even their biology. Yeah, and I really worry about this because this is like your literal physical form of identification deeply contrasting the way you feel and appear and interact in the world means that essentially I think you're not safe. Like, what if you can't have your actual gender identity on your driver's license and you get pulled over? I mean, there's a risk that you're going to be accused of impersonating somebody. How are you going to cross borders? Going into a country, a foreign country, or even coming back to the US, when again, somebody's going to say, you're not this person. We're just creating this situation that is scary, I think, and extremely limiting of the freedoms of people to simply exist and travel and move in the world. So related to your question, that's really what's been on my mind.
And I think there's so about 10 years ago, before there was an option other than M and F, even though that was so short-lived, there was a really prolific American sex researcher whose specialty was intersexuality. And that person also was intersex. So they were born with either phenotypically or genotypically ambiguous, extra chromosome, missing part of a chromosome, or phenotypically ambiguous genitals. And so they were an intersex person doing research on intersex people in the United States. They were being forced by the State Department to either check the M or F box, and they were saying that is a denial of my existence. Like, I don't care how you feel about this. This isn't how I feel about myself. Like, my biology doesn't even match one of these things. We can get into that other larger conversation later. And so the state, and they wanted to travel to Mexico to present their research at an international conference about intersexuality. And they were literally held hostage in the United States and could not leave the country because the State Department would not recognize the diversity of gender, of sex diversity in our chromosomes, right, on even that fundamental level. I see this in my classrooms all the time. I've become a thankfully, a resource for students, especially for queer and trans students and non-binary students who are looking for doctors that are, one, going to have ever heard of some of these words before, outside the context of all of the anti-trans, anti-non-binary sentiments. The scholar, trans scholar and author who I think was formerly at Barnard or Columbia, Jennifer Finney Boylan, is a trans woman. She's a trans elder. She's amazing. And she was recently interviewed, and the interviewer asked, you transitioned decades ago. What was it like for you, especially growing up? I think she grew up in like a relatively, rural, location. And she said, people were awkward about it. They were confused, but it was small town vibes, so they were generally nice because they had not yet learned to hate me. Mm-hmm. Right? We have just ratcheted up the anti-trans and anti-non-binary and anti-any gender expression that is not exclusively masculine and feminine, male or female. And so it is not infrequent that I have students who come to me saying, hey, Dr. J, can you recommend a physician, who I can go to and I can actually they'll check me in and not dead name me, using the name that the person was assigned with at birth before they changed their name. Can I actually talk about the symptoms that I'm having that have nothing to do with, or very little to do with, the fact that I'm trans, and more to do with the fact that my lungs don't feel great right now. Without thinking that the reason I'm here is because I'm having some sort of issue because I'm trans, or I'm non-binary trans and I'm here because actually I've been on some hormones, or I'm having, I'm experiencing menstruation or amenorrhea or a variety or host of sexual dysfunction and or reproductive or sexual health problems. And I just don't want someone to make me feel bad or unsafe or, make a comment or be dismissive or invalidating.
Or refuse to take you on as a patient.
Or just patently refuse to take you on.
Because medical professionals will do that. And there are there are places that will not take you on if you will not going to be the defined binary.
And
right?
so what does that mean? That means that then anyone who identifies outside that binary doesn't seek as much of medical care as they should, especially when they're hurting, right? Which then can compound problems. We also know that folks who are gender and sexual minorities disproportionately have more barriers and access to health insurance, healthcare, ability to pay for that healthcare. And so we can see this just stacks upon itself over and over again, which then creates a lot of undue tension, stress at a minimum, and at a maximum a lack of attuned care to get these people medical care that anyone should have the right to access in a kind and generous way.
Excellent. All right, so that was perfect timing too. We have about 25 minutes to open this up to questions, and I of course have more questions that I can ask, but I want to give the audience a chance. Yep.
Can you talk about something that's big in the news is trans athletes, right? So we've got all these hundreds of thousands of men who are dressing as women and playing women's sports, which I know is not true. But can you talk about that? What happens? What do you do if you're trans and and you're an athlete?
Yeah.
And just a reminder to the panelists, please repeat back a summary of the questions, just so the mics pick them up.
I'll summarize the question, and then I feel like Jen, you'd be great to field that.
Sure.
So, as I understand it, what you're asking is, what are our opinions on this political context in which people assume there are, I guess, chromosomally male people trying to take on roles in women's sports with some sort of assumption that it's unfair? Does that capture what you said?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So I'll say this. One, let's remember that this stuff is messy, and part of the problem is that people are trying to find really simple, reductive solutions to problems. Also, this is a manufactured problem. This is not to minimize anyone's experience. Certainly, any of the young cis women who might feel that there is disservice or unfairness. But when we think about how big of a wedge issue and a cultural lightning rod this has been, we are talking about less than 0.01% of the population, right? And if we're talking about competitive sports like Olympic level, we are talking about even less. Who are we talking about? We're talking about a 6th grader that just wants to play volleyball with her friends, right? We're talking about young kids, and we are talking about kids. Because really this is about sports in K through 12, and that get people, the PTA riled up, the Board of Education riled up, a lot of the headlines, right? If we're looking at like actual, real, competitive, professional sports, Olympics, this is such a small percentage of the population that is potentially a different protocol, set of rules, negotiations, way to navigate than when we're talking about like, Saturday morning soccer game in like 5th, 6th, 7th grade, all the way through high school. So recognizing that we've like made this huge problem out of, we're trying to find solutions for a huge problem that doesn't actually really exist. And so I think one of the actual solutions to that real problem of the manufacturedness of this problem is to start more open, honest, vulnerable, scientifically accurate, developmentally appropriate, peer-reviewed, evidence-based, and not just conversations that are attuned to that insecurity that we were talking about earlier. So I would also say that would we argue that a swimmer like Michael Phelps had an unfair disadvantage because he has an enormous wingspan? Right? And so when you're talking about sports and athletics, people are going to have unfair advantages. If you are just naturally, you are able to have a higher oxygen affinity, or if you have different musculature in certain capacities, right? And so relying solely on gender to dictate and say that's because that's where all of the unfairness is happening. No, recognizing that there is already so much diversity in the kinds of bodies among all the different types of sports. And by and large, too, are we talking about upper body strength, lower body strength? Are we talking about flexibility, right? So what skill sets are we actually looking at? And is there an actual, again, evidence-based, biologically sound argument that there is some sort of inequity or discretion happening here? But at a baseline, it's really about, the conversation's getting really nasty about can my trans daughter just plan a team with her friends on a Sunday morning?
Yeah. And as I understand it, there are data, I mean, this is a new area of research, but there is a recent study showing that for the most part, these trans female athletes do not have an advantage. And so, again, this is just a created problem meant to divide us and meant to develop hate.
Yeah, there's not a difference, really, not a statistically significant difference. Where I think that some of this comes from is there's competitiveness. We all know about competitiveness, right? Whether it's your kid's high school game or their Saturday morning Pee Wee baseball game, right? Parents are very competitive, and they want their children to win. And so there's that, and that's both male and female biological parents or adoptive parents, or surrogate parents, they're all the same, right? So there's that also that's coming into it. This person is going to outcompete somebody, right? And that could be a problem. So, but it's definitely, as far as it's been blown up, it's a wedge issue. And it's deliberately done to divide I won't even say what the two camps are, but you know what they are.
So don't fall for it.
Don't fall for
A
it.
little bit in. I wonder how many people who are on these, very anti-trans pulpits talking about this actually know any trans athletes at the, school level or in the professional sports. Considering we're talking about such a small percentage, I would say that would be unlikely just by chance in general.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's an active desire not to know who they are because they have an imaginary idea of what a trans person looks like. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah. And I mean, we see again and again children being used as an excuse to harm,
Deprive.
oppress, deprive. So, I mean, if we're really worried about kids' well-being, maybe we shouldn't be cutting SNAP and WIC, So this impacts so few people, and yet we have these extremely important programs that are really under threat. So I find that frustrating.
I would say it also impacts so few people, but the impact that this has on those few people is intense and overwhelming. And the impact that it then has on their friends and their families and the people who love them, right? And want to care for and support them. So it is this huge issue that impacts this small amount of people in this really big and life-changingly, profoundly transformational way with like the real world experience of doing harm. And hopefully that young person is surrounded by people that love them, but also we know that that's not always true. Gender is also often racialized. Gender is also negotiated by class, right? I'm not reinventing Kimberly Crenshaw's theory of intersectionality, but gender is also one of the things that we don't talk about is the way that gender and ability or disability interact, right? We essentially can see like disabled folks as not having a gender or being genderless, right? Which butts up against this idea. You're like, wait a minute, that's not how it's supposed to work. And so the real world impact and ramifications, especially from lawmakers who maybe have never met a trans person or met a trans kid, had to look that trans kid in the eyes, right? Mm-hmm. Or is the one taking them, to play on the playground. That has the potential to do some real harm and damage.
And again, from the psychological perspective, if we want to reduce bias, if we want to reduce intergroup tension, then we want people to get to know each other. Intergroup interaction, the vast majority of the time, leads to improved relationships because people see, oh, you're not the stereotype. But now what we've done is we've created this space where people don't even feel safe revealing their identities. So it just puts another wall between ourselves and actually better understanding.
And there's a lot of biological consequences to the individual when they lose that freedom and that safety and that security. Your stress levels go up, you don't sleep, that makes things worse, and that's being foisted upon us because of something that is really not serious in any way, shape, or form. Right, they're not walking into the building with an armed, with an AK-47. Right, it's just not. It's serious. It's a serious consequence of something that is very uncommon. Right, and it shouldn't be, and it certainly should not be applied to children who do not have the resources to handle the stress or even to express their stress.
Yeah, and who have it hard enough already, right? Like
right.
Middle school is not like it's fun to begin with. So
high school wasn't great either. So
do we really have to make it harder?
All right, more questions? Yes. You. That's great.
So like as a trans person who's experiencing a lot of like the fears that was discussed today, do you honestly think that things are going to improve politically anytime soon?
It's a really good question.
Oh, we should repeat it first.
Oh, sure. So the question was, do we think that it is going to politically change for the better anytime soon for trans folks? I'm really excited to say that I'll actually be teaching at the law school at Temple in the fall. I think I'm the first human sexuality PhD to do that. And so to be able to teach the future legislators, judges, civil rights attorneys, all the things that they need to know, just in these parts of this conversation here, I would say two things. One, no, unfortunately. I think that it is a very tense time right now. But that being said, the center will not hold on this. And we've already started to see the cracks. I have witnessed, even in just my 10 years of teaching young people, right, as scary as these times are, like the cat's out of the bag. Younger generations are identifying, in a whole bunch of new ways, more and more. And so I don't think that there is going to be this like going back to like the true dark ages. But I do think that it means in this time when we cannot necessarily rely on our institutions and pillars to protect those of us that are the most vulnerable, this is where I think community and mutual aid really, really come in, really need to be made into more robust parts of our lives. And I know that's really hard in a world where we're still trying to sort ourselves out post-pandemic, where a lot of us were living in isolation and loneliness, and our communities are being chipped away at. Right, there aren't that many third spaces anymore that you can go to and don't have to pay to be there. So I would say, not only to survive in these times, but to thrive. Just remember that the sheer act of existing is resistance, and that there is joy in that resistance. Right? I highly recommend Dr. Laurel Westbrook's book on trans joy. It's amazing. Her work is some of the most new and cutting edge and personally exciting for me. And so she reminds us all that the call to action is to find those small pockets of joy. I don't remember, maybe one of you would remember the feminist who said, if there's no dancing at the revolution, I don't want to it's not my revolution. But so when you are feeling particularly despairing, until all of this gets sorted out and we come out on the other side of it, whenever that might be, and I don't think it's going to be quick. Just to try to find and remember the things that bring you those momentary acts of those points of pleasure, that joy, being in community. I will say that Temple University is hosting, for the beginning of Trans Week of Visibility, we're starting it out this coming Friday, a Trans Excellence art show. So it is an art exhibit at the Tyler School of Art and Architecture on Temple's campus. The opening reception is at 6 p.m. It is open to the public, and it is featuring all of the amazing art by trans artists. We also are fortunate on Temple's campus to have the Queer Materials Lab, which is our purple beacon of hope and wonder. And so please, take advantage of any of those little moments of community, sense of belonging, acts of joy and resistance that you can, because I think that that's how we're all going to get through this, especially cis folks. Cis folks need to really step up and take the hits. Big time. So be in those spaces that is legitimately unsafe for trans, non-binary, agender, bigender folks to be in. And so whether it's being in those spaces, breaking out the credit card or the wallet and donating specifically to trans orgs or folks that are supporting trans excellence, that's some of my advice to get us through for right now.
Can I also just throw in, because I'm here at Widener and I'm not somebody who teaches in human sexuality. I'm a botanist, by the way. I didn't say that earlier. But this is something I'm really, really passionate about. And so this may feel really hopeless. I have a hard time watching the news. It's a bludgeoning every day. But this is a great time to be in college. I'm serious. This is a great time to be in college. You've got us. You've got older folks who have been through some of the fight. You've got people that are allies that haven't been in the fight and are joining the fight because they're pissed off. There's a lot of support here, and no matter how the words might change sometimes, and I know we're navigating that stupid dance where we're trying not to get the school shut down because of executive orders, which every school is dealing with right now. But I know from the top down, everybody here does not want to see that happen. Everybody here is really upset. Maybe not 100% of the people, right? But there are plenty of people here that are in power in the university and teaching classes and everything else who are 100% with you and are going to become as visible an ally as humanly possible, so that you know that it's not just maybe a person who will smile at you in the hallway, but it's somebody who's actually trying to have your back and trying to look out for you. So I hope that that's some amount of joy here, because I'm in this fight.
And we all
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
I want to build a little bit on what you both have been saying. So, as I said before, I'm chair of GWS, Gender, Women's, and Sexuality Studies. And we spent a lot of time last semester and the beginning of this semester collecting notes of support from students and faculty for our LGBTQ+ community on campus. And so if you go to gws.widener on Instagram, I post one of those cards every day, a picture of one of those cards every day. So I am hopeful that better represents reality. There are people who who are feeling hate and discrimination right now, but I don't think that they reflect the majority. I think that they are the minority, and you know, people are scared right now, and so maybe they're quieter than we would like them to be. But you know, I mean, we know that silence is viewed as, and I mean sometimes is effectively siding with the oppressor, but that is not necessarily the intention of quiet people. I think that there are a lot of quiet people who are actually lending support and maybe are not as outspoken as we would like them to be. So I hope that if you look at these cards that you can see that there are a lot of people who really do have the backs of the LGBTQ plus population on campus. You know, and you were talking about, you know, you don't think we're going to go back to the dark ages. It just reminds me of sort of a theory of politics that I have, is that, you know, when we have progress, we have backlash. And so I do think that that's what's happening here, is that we did make progress. The world looks different than it did 20 years ago.
Even 10 years ago.
Even 10 years ago. And so we're taking a hit now, and it's hard and it hurts. But the progress is still moving in that same direction. You know, this is just a little swing of the pendulum, and I don't mean to minimize it, because it hurts a lot and people are suffering. Like it's not anything that we should be trivializing, but I really firmly believe it will pass and that it will be replaced by more progress.
We're being waved at. No, I just want to say something in this context. If you are living your authentic self, you have joy, and you are part of the resistance. Because you are living your authentic self, I have joy and can be part of the resistance. And if I didn't know that you were living your authentic self, I wouldn't have that. So you brought something to me, and I hope that by being in the resistance, we bring something to you.
I would say too, we talk a lot over in GSWS, certainly after this year, we talk a lot about resisting. But sometimes we talk about resisting, we just feel like all we're doing is pushing and pushing and pushing. And that can feel, for me personally, that feels really exhausting and can lead to burnout. So we need the resistance work, but we also need like the possibility of imagination, right? And all the building. So it's okay to stop resisting every now and again, right? And stop pushing, and instead, like start building the amazing things that you want to see happen in the world. Those things that bring you joy, that do, you know, what communities can do best. And when I say community, it doesn't have to be this big, bold thing. That can be like one or two other people, right? You can find community in a single relationship or just a handful of relationships. And so I try to remember, especially if you're someone who is reading the news all the time or you're doing this work, you're just paying attention, it can get really exhausting. And so I have found some rest and ability to recharge my batteries by doing the building work. So doing the creating. There's also like a really great 4-minute video on YouTube called The Bridges of Meghalaya. And it is about indigenous communities who during monsoon season, their towns get completely washed out and you cannot travel from one place to another. And so generation over generation over generation, they have built these living bridges from the trees, connecting their communities to one another in times of intense monsoon and intense rains. And so the point being that like none of this work gets done in a single generation or even many generations. It is complete and ongoing, and it'll still be here long after. And so how can we continue to be part of the folks that build those bridges to the communities we have now, but also build bridges to the future that we want to see long after we're gone too, not to be so morbid, but yeah.
We have maybe time for one more question, and then we're kind of at time. So no pressure on the person who might be asking them.
I have a question about what are your thoughts on how militant do you think the opposition to our existence is going to become? Because I have experience with it, and I just want to hear your takes on it.
So the question is, how militant do we think the attacks on, I'll say, trans people will come, or will become? I welcome anyone to jump in there.
I would say this, I often, wish that I had a crystal ball. I think that's really hard to predict. I think we've already seen some things that we, even just 6 months ago, would not necessarily have thought would come to pass. Mm-hmm. So I always want to leave open that, there are things that we also can't necessarily predict now that could make things significantly worse. But there also might be things that we can't predict now that will surprise us and delight us. And so I think, again, doing both the resisting and the building, while things aren't the most awful they could be, is a way to try to make sure that we don't get to whatever the really awful place is. So I have already found in the small pockets, in the communities that I'm in, suddenly folks that never thought about this stuff before, never talked about this stuff before, are suddenly checking new books out of the library. They're donating to different causes and moving all their money into different spaces. They're the ones who don't necessarily know how to speak the language of gender and sexuality, but are out in their kids' school, or they're out at the grocery store talking to the cashier, or they're calling on their Congress people, their council people. They're getting much more politically engaged. And so I think that that's a obviously tough question to ask, but I would remind us that for all the ways that we think this could get way worse, to not forget all of the ways that we can try to prevent that from happening, and all the ways it might surprise us when, as things continue to move and take shape.
Can I throw out a thought too, as the impromptu panelist? I'm just thinking one way that I feel better sometimes when I'm feeling completely overwhelmed for my own personal identity, my own family, my own marriage that might be a threat with some of this stuff, is that I can help other people, sometimes having an active role in others, and there's so much intersectionality in all of this. I think about, the immigrant community, DEI being broadly under attack, women's rights being under attack, trans lives being completely under attack. All these different things are overwhelming when you're in that identity. But I talk about visible allyship. Sometimes when you're feeling bludgeoned, it helps your feelings to reach out to another group or another person where you're I can see what's happening with you, I want to help, and put that out there too. So I just throw that out to everybody, because we're all being hit differently, and it can feel really isolating. And sometimes feeling like you can have a role in helping somebody else feel better or more confident might help you yourself.
I would also say the Uplifting Trans Fund is really amazing. They also provide a ton of super rad resources run by a fellow Widener grad from the PhD in Human Sexuality program. And they have 25 awesome, very applied tips for what you can do right now. It's not these vagaries and abstractions. It's right now. And some are really teeny tiny and some are bigger. And so, for yourselves and to share those, I'm happy to share the link, and then you can all have access to it. So, yeah.
All right, we're kind of at 5 o'clock, right on the dot, and I don't want to be disrespectful of anybody's time. But I think we're probably going to end the recording, and I thank all of you for coming. I thank everybody for watching online, whoever ends up watching this. And I'll just leave it to maybe if the panelists want to talk to some audience members one-on-one, that would be great, if you guys have time.
See you at the reception.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for showing up.
Good stuff.